I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
That was Hillary Clinton's infamous reaction after Gaddafi was executed. But the real reason for his murder, he dared to launch a gold-backed currency that could free Africa from the dollar. The West knew, if he succeeded, their empire would fall. Now a new name has surfaced, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He isn't just continuing Gaddafi's mission.
Even Libya, who destroyed Libya, once again they used a black man.
He's expanding it, with the full backing of an entire region. And after 16 failed attempts, the West still can't stop him. Why? Because this time, Africa's not alone. But here's what makes Traoré different. He learned from Gaddafi's fall. Back then, there was no social media. Journalists were silenced. Western outlets like CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera painted Gaddafi as a monster. And many of us believed it, because that's all we were shown. Growing up, the name Gaddafi meant dictator, tyrant, mass murderer. But no one told us about the great man-made river, a $33 billion self-funded irrigation system that turned the desert green. Or that Gaddafi gave every Libyan family free electricity. Or that education and healthcare were entirely free. Or that new newlyweds got $50,000 from the state to start a home. That story was hidden. His image was destroyed, and his people were turned against him. That's what Traoré avoided. From day one, he defined himself to the world, before the West could. He embraced the media, rallied his people, and stayed ahead of the narrative. And that's why he's become so hard to get. He's not isolated. His people are with him. Africa is with him. But here's the chilling question. If Gaddafi was killed for this plan, how far will the West go to stop Traoré? And what happens when they realize this time it's too late? Before we go further, remember this: at Black Rebellion, we don't deal in rumors. Every detail we share comes from verified local journalists and trusted online sources. These are black untold stories, truths the Western narrative works hard to bury. But silence is how history gets erased. Your voice, your share, your subscription, that's how we fight back. So like, subscribe, and share this with every black community you know. The truth echo louder than their lies. Now, let us unveil the truth. Officially, the invasion of Libya was sugar-coated as civilian protection. Some said it was about oil. But those who understood global power saw the real motive: currency. Gaddafi's plan to launch a gold-backed African currency, the gold dinar, was designed to eliminate US dollar dependence in African trade. That single idea put a target on his back. Why? Because nearly 90% of international trade flows through US dollars. 60% of global reserves are held in dollars. And 40% of the world's debt is issued in dollars. That's not just economics. That's empire. Gaddafi's gold currency, it wasn't just a financial alternative. It was a threat to everything that props up Western global dominance. And that's why they killed him. But what if I told you Traoré and his AES counterparts have dared the West and launched the initiative, boldly picking up where Gaddafi left off? And this time, the script didn't go as planned. In the aftermath of Gaddafi's execution, the Western media framed Libya's collapse as the price of dictatorship. But behind the headlines and justifications of humanitarian intervention, something darker was unfolding. Something far more calculated. Because Libya wasn't the only country in crisis at the time. Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, all were embroiled in violent unrest. Yet none of them triggered a Western bombing campaign like Libya did. Why? Because no other leader was about to launch a gold-backed currency that could shake the global financial order. When Hillary Clinton's private emails were leaked in 2016, they confirmed what many already suspected: the war wasn't just about oil or civilians, or even regime change. It was about stopping the rise of an independent African currency before it began. Gaddafi had proposed a united monetary system, a gold dinar that would allow African and Muslim nations to trade oil and resources only in gold. A direct threat not just to the US dollar, but to the entire Western-dominated economic structure. Had this vision materialized, Africa would have broken free from the financial chains of the French African franc and IMF debt. Wealth would no longer be measured by how many dollars a nation held, but by how much gold it possessed. And to grasp the full weight of that threat, you have to understand the system Gaddafi challenged. Since the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, the US dollar has been the centerpiece of global finance. Back then, it was backed by gold, until 1971, when President Nixon unpegged the dollar entirely and struck a deal with OPEC. High oil would now be sold exclusively in dollars. This move birthed the petrodollar system, turning the greenback into the lifeblood of global trade. From that moment, every country that needed oil had to first acquire US dollars, regardless of where the oil came from. That artificial demand gave Washington the power to print money endlessly and still dominate global markets. Meanwhile, developing nations, especially in Africa, were lured into IMF loans that buried them in debt. These loans came with structural adjustment programs that crippled growth, privatized public wealth, and stripped countries of economic sovereignty. So when Gaddafi stood up and said, "Let's trade in gold," he wasn't just making a financial suggestion. He was declaring war on a system that had ruled unchallenged for decades. In 2009, Gaddafi was elected chairman of the African Union. From that seat of power, he pushed harder than ever for a continent united, not just in name, but in currency and capital. A bold move. And, as history shows us, a deadly one. This isn't to say Gaddafi was a saint. While he oversaw Libya's transformation into one of Africa's most prosperous nations, with free healthcare, subsidized housing, and the highest human development index on the continent, he also ruled with an iron grip. Critics accused him of backing insurgent groups and suppressing dissent. Still, his intentions as chairman of the African Union unsettled Western powers, not because of what he had done, but because of what he was planning. In the early 2000s, Gaddafi had begun cozying up to the West. He opened parts of Libya's economy to foreign investors and sought diplomatic normalization. But the cautionary tale of Saddam Hussein still loomed large. After all, in 2000, Saddam had dared to switch Iraqi oil sales from US dollars to euros. The punishment was swift sanctions invasion execution. Not for tyranny, but for threatening dollar supremacy. Gaddafi saw the pattern. At an Arab League summit, he issued a chilling warning. America hanged Saddam. We might be next. He wasn't wrong. His push for African unity was decades in the making. He envisioned a continent not just politically united, but economically sovereign, with one currency, one army, and one passport. Of those three, only the currency posed a true threat to the West. Why? Because money is power, and Gaddafi was about to rewrite the rules. Western intelligence soon caught on. In 2011, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy allegedly called Gaddafi a threat to the financial security of the world. That same year, an email leaked from Hillary Clinton's private server confirmed the real fear. Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount of silver, intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan gold dinar. That one plan was enough to shift the entire geopolitical chessboard. Because if Francophone African countries dropped the CFA franc for Gaddafi's gold dinar, France would lose its grip. And if oil and resources were traded in gold rather than dollars, America's financial empire would face a direct challenge. The military intervention in Libya wasn't just about containing a dictator. It was about killing a currency before it could be born. Gaddafi wasn't removed for crimes against humanity. He was eliminated for daring to challenge the global financial order, one dominated by the West, led by the United States. According to declassified US intelligence and diplomatic cables, the motives for Western intervention had nothing to do with protecting civilians. They were about 5 things: securing control over Libya's vast oil reserves, reasserting Western dominance in North Africa, strengthening political influence for key Western leaders, giving NATO forces a stage to project power globally, and above all, neutralizing Gaddafi's plans to challenge the dollar and the euro with a pan-African gold-backed currency. Communism wasn't on the list. Gaddafi had become far more dangerous than a rogue dictator. He was showing Africa what sovereignty could look like: self-funded, interest-free, and free of Western control. His most ambitious project, the Great Man-Made River, was a 33 billion irrigation miracle, turning Libya's desert into fertile farmland. It was financed entirely through Libya's own state-owned bank. No IMF, no World Bank, no colonizer strings attached. It became a threat, not just to Western oil interests, but to the entire global debt economy. So NATO bombed it. Not only the pipelines, but the very factory that produced the concrete pipes. They didn't just attack infrastructure. They targeted independence. Because what Gaddafi represented wasn't chaos, it was control. African control. And that was intolerable. The West fears a militarized Africa less than it fears an economically free Africa. And Gaddafi was building just that, with oil-backed cash and gold-backed plans. His proposed African dinar would have shattered the CFA franc system, weakened the petrodollar, and forced the world to treat Africa as an equal, economically, politically, and diplomatically. This was not about human rights. It was about hegemony. The average citizen in the West may believe in democracy, freedom, and justice. But their governments dress up resource control as rescue missions because generosity sells. Empire delivers. And so, the message was sent. Challenge the West's financial supremacy and you sign your own death warrant. But Gaddafi's vision did not die with him. Today, a new generation of African leaders is picking up where he left off. But through his ideological sons, military leaders from the AES bloc. These aren't just soldiers. They are the continuation of Gaddafi's unfinished rebellion. And this time, they're doing it quietly. Building the financial institutions of liberation without asking the West for permission. 3 African nations just built their own banks quietly without asking the IMF, France, or anyone else. No news coverage, no outside funding, no approvals. Just silence and a bold new financial weapon. But what exactly did they create, and why is the West avoiding the conversation, but working behind the scenes to eliminate them silently? Let's find out. Something monumental just happened in West Africa in a low-key declaration that hardly made the news. At first glance, the establishment of a new financial organization by 3 landlocked nations appeared to be a straightforward regional endeavor. But if you look a little closer, you see that this wasn't your typical situation. This was the kind of breakaway that shakes the foundations of established systems. Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, nations that are frequently reduced to statistics concerning insurgency, coups, and poverty, have just taken a risk. They established their own regional bank. The Confederate Bank for Investment and Development is the name of the organization. Don't be fooled by the bureaucratic nomenclature, though. This is not some innocuous government agency. This uprising is expressed in money. A bank with a single goal: to finance the future without meddling supervision or Western funds. It began with 500 billion CFA francs, all between 820 and 833 million. A substantial sum of money by any measure, but particularly for nations that were told they couldn't finance anything without outside assistance. Until recently. The money is no longer coming from Brussels, Washington, or Paris. It originates inside their respective economies, inside their reserves, inside their local networks. It's African currency intended for African growth. This bank's existence alone isn't what makes it so disruptive. It's the cause and the location of it. These are not Africa's economic superpowers. These nations are in the Sahel, caught in geopolitical turmoil, deserted by international allies, and subjected to sanctions. Nevertheless, they have accomplished something that experts claimed was impossible, in spite of the pandemonium. They are taking charge of their economic future by subtly constructing the instruments of sovereignty rather than by demonstrating in public places. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was not ostentatious. No international dignitaries at the gala. Investors were not the target audience for the launch. It was not an aesthetic issue. It had to do with intent. This type of desire indicates that something more significant is happening. These nations are no longer in need of assistance. They're saying they don't require it. And they're doing it with deeds, not words. Free nations that were formerly a part of the Francophone West African economic system, linked to the French, backed CFA currency, and intricately involved in organizations such as ECOWAS and the West African Economic and Monetary Union, would be served by the Confederate Bank. However, since 2023, these same nations have begun to reorganize their relationships, expelled French soldiers, and withdrawn from AES. As a result, when they claim to have constructed a bank, it's not just a bank. Rather, it's the last phase of their exit strategy, an indication that they won't be returning. This is when the narrative becomes even more disturbing for everyone watching. Not for them. This was more than a reaction to loneliness. The escalation was planned. Following economic pressure, political exclusion, and sanctions, these countries took an uncommon step in global politics. They ceased to respond and began to construct. They did not respond with diplomatic outrage or threats. In response, they produced something. Material that increases their independence, decreases their vulnerability, a quiet revolution, and one Gaddafi, no doubt, would have recognized instantly, and makes them more difficult to manipulate. You must consider what this bank replaces in order to comprehend the scope of what is taking place. For many years, donor-backed initiatives run by non-governmental organizations and foreign contractors, as well as organizations like the World Bank and the African Development Bank, have shaped the region's growth. These collaborations often required ceding authority, changing regulations, and agreeing to scrutiny by those in charge of the finances. That script is reversed by the Confederate Bank. It returns decision-making and funding to the local community. Furthermore, this move isn't symbolic. It is designed to finance actual projects, infrastructure, industrial growth, and agriculture. Sectoral areas that the IMF is consistently too slow to support, and too fast to politicize. You don't have to establish your creditworthiness to a Western economist who has never stepped foot in a Sahelian village. When you work with this bank, there's no need to fulfill growth goals formulated in boardrooms abroad. The only prerequisite is that the initiative benefits the local community, rather than international investors. The West's lack of response to this action says a lot. There is no media frenzy, no expert committees questioning how this would impact the stability of the region, and no retaliation. It seems as though the only remaining tactic is to act as though it never happened. Because recognizing this bank is recognizing something far riskier than a simple financial transaction. It entails recognizing Africa's capacity to develop its own systems. That the three coup nations are capable of planning, coordinating, and taking the lead. Therefore, the Confederate Bank enters the scene quietly and defiantly, rather than with much fanfare. It's not ostentatious. It doesn't want to make headlines. However, it is designed to endure, and more significantly, to expand. The question now is, why did they do this? You need to look beyond the numbers to see why Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger established this bank. Ambition was not the source. Exhaustion gave birth to it. Something finally broke. After decades of waiting, cooperating, and conforming to development partners' expectations. Not in outrage or protest, but in clarity. These countries didn't decide to establish a bank overnight. They came to a conclusion that few others have dared to express us. There has always been a rig in the game. The Sahelian people were told for years that foreign help would bring them salvation. Every new government was expected to shake hands with beaming diplomats who managed the aid flow, pursue reform packages, and demonstrate its allegiance to foreign financiers. It started to happen frequently. A tiresome, embarrassing ritual. Although leaders changed, the regulations remained. Sign, borrow, and act as though it's helpful. What did they receive in exchange? Airports that never got going. Roads that didn't lead anywhere. Initiatives that terminated quietly after ribbon cuttings for the headlines. The appearance of development was sufficient, but not for the people. The reality is that a large portion of this aid was intended to maintain dependence, not end it. Something that Western governments and international banks hardly ever acknowledge. They ceded their policy space in return for loans. They gave contracts to foreign companies in return for assistance. They saw their sovereignty erode in the name of cooperation. They were instructed to wait each time they requested agricultural investment. They were told it was too dangerous each time they suggested local industry. However, the money came in every time a multinational corporation sought access to their uranium, cotton, or gold. That's not mismanagement. That's exactly the dependency Gaddafi warned Africa about. That system is operating precisely as intended. Additionally, these nations have had enough. For this reason, their decision to construct their bank was emotional as well as strategic. The goal was to restore the dignity that had been damaged by years of financial dependence. We're no longer asking. It was about conveying a message. They do not oppose progress. They are turning away from the developmental paradigm that initially caused their dependence. However, this uprising has a deeper dimension than just financial. The world rejected the Sahel States Alliance, AES, as a defensive pact, when these three nations founded it in 2023 after being suspended from ECOWAS. They needed something to stay afloat. However, desperation did not give rise to the AES. Clarity gave birth to it. Africa can no longer afford to be tactful about its pain. According to this political, cultural, and intellectual alignment, that is what binds Captain Traoré, Govanta, and Chiani together. They control narratives in addition to ruling nations, narratives that defy filtering by donor-funded media outlets or Western focus groups. They have said unequivocally that their revolutions are psychological as much as military. Their goal is to convince their people that the days of constantly looking out are over, and that waiting is no longer necessary. Therefore, in the Western sense, this bank is not a financial entity. It resembles a machine that tells a counter-narrative. It rewires the concept of development. These leaders are deciding to demonstrate its value to their own people rather than to international investors. They're creating mechanisms that enable day-to-day living to go on without begging, rather than adjusting GDP to improve credit ratings. But don't get me wrong, this was more than simply internal annoyance. A trigger was present. The mask came off when France withdrew its troops, imposed sanctions, and stopped providing aid as a result of their refusal to adhere to democratic standards. These countries realized then that their friendship with the West was not unconditional, that the assistance ceased as soon as they disobeyed. And then something came up that altered everything. Were we ever genuinely sovereign if they could cut us off so easily? At that point, the bank's concept became a line in the sand rather than a side project. Additionally, this promise held true throughout time, in contrast to many other post-colonial ones that did not, because it was based on memories rather than ideology. The recollection of how their currencies were manipulated, their economies plundered, and their futures secured by beaming technical specialists and diplomats. They're remembering, not paranoid. They did, in fact, construct a bank. They actually constructed a wall, though, a barrier between their future and those in charge of it in the past. And that wall suddenly appears dangerous from the outside, since it is not a threat to progress or peace, but to the whole system that ensured these countries never had the means to dream without authorization. They stopped dreaming under other people's roofs and constructed the bank. This is precisely what Muammar Gaddafi envisioned when he pushed for a sovereign African financial system. It's no longer a dream, it's being built by his ideological heirs in AES. However, what would this bank do in reality? Thus, they constructed it as a guide for the future as much as a rejection of the past. It's hardly a vanity project, though. This is not a revolutionary monument. Money, materials, machinery, and brains are all intended to be moved by the Confederate Bank for investment and development. It's not here to make an impression. It is here to make the necessary repairs that no one else would. The West discussed infrastructure investment for years. However, there are still potholes and dusty roads connecting these three nations. The only thing that changed was the consultants and their findings. Even though the World Bank would announce multi-million-dollar railway projects, The Confederate Bank is now filling the void left by broken promises. What's its top priority? Rewiring the bones of the area. We are referring to rail lines that link the uranium hubs in Niger with the industries in Mali, and then to the distribution centers in Burkina Faso. Not to ports for export, nor to Europe, but to one another. For that is the distinction. This has nothing to do with exporting raw commodities to make money abroad. The goal is to create internal networks that support local labor and industry. The only viable routes for many years were those that led resources out of Africa. The goal of the Confederate Bank is to reverse the trend, to connect miners to energy resources, farmers to processors, and goods to local markets. It's the logistics of liberation. However, steel won't be enough to drive this change. Energy will be the future battlefield. The Confederate Bank is supporting a different future in an area dominated by imported gasoline prices and ravaged by blackouts. Energy grids that are locally maintained, decentralized and renewable. The strategy: large-scale solar farm investments, particularly in areas with the highest levels of energy poverty and sunshine. These mega projects are not foreign-built and do not need IMF oversight. Residents of the area are funding these community-powered microgrids because schools remain open as long as the lights remain on. Refrigerators are operated by clinics. Local companies no longer rely on diesel. Development suddenly becomes a reality. However, energy is just one component of the chain. The other is food. The Confederate Bank is getting ready to make a significant foray into the food processing and agricultural industries through national distribution centers, village-owned companies and local cooperatives, rather than international agribusinesses. In its simplicity, the objective is radical: eat what they grow, and grow what they eat. These nations have depended on imported wheat, rice, and processed commodities for far too long, even though they had more than enough soil to flourish. Why? Because funding for food self-sufficiency was discouraged by the aid system. Importing was usually less expensive, not because the land was unproductive, but rather because local farmers were left with machetes and draughts, while foreign food came with subsidies. That formula is being reversed by the Confederate Bank. Farmers now have access to the full chain: equipment, irrigation, storage, and processing. They no longer sell tomatoes for pennies while purchasing tomato paste in cans from Europe. It's not charity. This is agricultural sovereignty. Additionally, it has been constructed one hamlet, one tool, and one crop at a time. Then there are the heavens. Indeed, colonization has even spread to the skies. International airlines have controlled regional travel in West Africa for many years. It's a cruel joke. It is frequently necessary to travel through Europe in order to fly from one African nation to another. Now it is different. A regional airline that operates direct flights from Bamako to Niamey to Ouagadougou, free of layovers, visa restrictions, and legacy carrier price gouging, is being established by the Confederate Bank. The goal is to establish an aviation corridor that promotes regional trade, tourism, and education, all of which are vital to regional integration, but have never been profitable to international investors. However, it is more profound, because movement isn't the only aspect of integration. It has to do with trust. Furthermore, money has never trusted the frontiers of Africa. For this reason, the bank is creating digital platforms and interoperable payment systems that let people and companies send and receive money and carry out cross-border transactions without the need for euros or dollars. And that, too, was Gaddafi's vision. An Africa whose movement, trade, and money are not routed through foreign capitals. It was once dismissed, but now, quietly, it's being built. No more depending on the French-backed CFA system. No more exorbitant costs just to send money from Mali to Niger, unrestricted by colonial currency systems. The Confederate Bank is paving the way for genuine trade. Let's be clear, two idealists do not operate this bank. Those who run it are strategists. Every loan, project, and investment is made with consideration for national interest, long-term return, and risk management. They have observed debt traps. They've read the fine print. And they've learned that free money usually comes with invisible handcuffs. This time, they're the ones setting the terms. No, they don't have billions. Not yet. But what they do have is intent, astute, well-organized, and independently funded. Every dollar invested is meant to solve the kinds of problems no foreign partner has ever prioritized. Because when your hands are finally on the wheel, you drive in a different direction. Catching up to the West is not the goal here. The goal is to build what the West never intended to offer. You could analyze financial statements, project budgets, capital reserves, and balance sheets at the Confederate Bank, but only if you think like an economist. If you look again, you'll notice it's not built like a bank at all. It's built like a spine, a network, a fortress, because beneath the paperwork and loan programs lies a far more ambitious mission: unification with purpose. Not merely for profit, not just for politics, but for the survival and sovereignty of people. Development isn't the only goal here. The goal is to bind the three nations to a common future, one that no outsider can break. Africa's story has long been one of manufactured disunity, engineered so thoroughly that borders, languages, currencies, and even time zones were divided by colonial whim. Fragmentation ensured dependence. Railroads don't link countries that share waterways. Nations that speak the same language trade in foreign tongues. Neighbors who should collaborate are tied to different donors, different predators, and different agendas. That wasn't an accident. It was a blueprint. One designed to keep West African nations vulnerable to each other's weaknesses and dependent on foreign capital. The Confederate Bank is tearing through that wall, not with treaties or summits, but with concrete investments. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are joining their economies and securing their futures together, through fiber optics, through collaborative ventures, through independent digital systems, not a handshake infrastructure. This bank doesn't just lend to nations, it funds a bloc. And that matters, because you are no longer three isolated, vulnerable states. Once your development plans, energy grids, transport systems, and food networks are in sync, you become a single, coordinated unit. The Confederate Bank is the financial engine of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, which functions on that exact principle. Vision becomes infrastructure. It's what turns ideas into roads. It's what transforms slogans into supply chains, statements into spreadsheets, and spreadsheets into everyday commerce between once divided communities. In fact, put the bank aside for a moment. If you want to grasp the gravity of what's unfolding, just observe what it replaces. For years, regional integration meant ECOWAS, a bloc that looked powerful on paper, but in reality was paralyzed, built on a colonial currency, still tethered to the euro. Dominated by larger countries like Nigeria and aligned with Western policy, smaller nations had to plead with ECOWAS for flexibility for years. In return, they received nothing but bureaucracy. But ECOWAS didn't act like a brotherhood when the Sahelian military governments made decisions that the West disapproved of. Decisions like expelling foreign troops, rejecting exploitative contracts, and exposing blatant hypocrisy. No, it acted like a police force: suspensions, sanctions, border closures, isolation. So when the Sahel nations broke away and formed AES, they weren't rejecting unity. They were redefining it. Integration wasn't being dismantled, it was being rebuilt on their terms. And today, AES is far more than just a political alliance. Thanks to the Confederate Bank at its center, it's a functioning system with shared economic regulations, a unified budget, and a coordinated currency strategy. They are drafting customs agreements. They are building joint procurement systems. They are proposing a common market for essential goods and services. All managed, executed, and safeguarded by the bank. And here's where it becomes powerful, because unity isn't just tactical, it's defensive. Alone, these nations were exposed to coups, to sanctions, to economic sabotage. But together, they are far harder to destabilize, far harder to isolate. No more single points of failure. No more weaponizing the weakness of one state to dismantle the others. When Burkina Faso was cut off from aid, Mali stepped in. When Niger was sanctioned, AES partners opened alternative trade routes. And now, they no longer have to justify themselves to uncooperative lenders, because they have a regional bank. They're no longer forced to restructure their economies every time a Western institution updates its governance standards. They've built a closed-loop system, based not on secrecy, but on self-determination. And the gateway into that system is the bank itself. If you want access to the opportunities, capital, and markets inside this block, you abide by AS rules, not Washington's, not Paris's, and not Brussels. The roles have been reversed. For the first time, African nations are building the framework, and outsiders must now decide whether they're willing to join on Africa's terms. This isn't just a policy shift, it's a posture shift. The Confederate Bank is not merely a financial institution, it's a political instrument. A new tool for assertion, not reaction. For designing reality, not just responding to it. And the world is starting to notice. What happens when Guinea applies to join AS? When Chad turns to the Confederate Bank for funding? What happens when a so-called minor alliance achieves what the AU couldn't accomplish in decades? This is no longer a local experiment. This is a continental prototype, and it's working. So tell us, do you still think African nations need help? Do you still believe full independence is out of reach? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Here on Black Rebellion, we uncover the untold stories of Black existence, Black rebellion, and Black untold history. Subscribe to join the movement. By doing so, you're not just staying informed. You're becoming part of a global push to reclaim Africa's rightful place in the world. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's spread knowledge and build sovereignty together. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, you know, so the African them not really agree with the overthrowing thing, you know. Yes, the African them not really agree with it. And when we look on most head of state, including America and England, them are not really clean according to what you hear them tell about other people, like dictator and other people, like this and that. And them deal with Muammar Gaddafi and say the people them not really like him. But is that really true? Because for them propaganda machine is at rapid when it's ready to spread propaganda, you know. So things will look good, it then make it look bad, and things will look bad, it make it look good. And we know the history of these superpowers over the years in propaganda, when them propaganda machines start to move, you know. If them man they start to tell us that Jesus in a New York City, you know, say, when them done with it, you're going to believe that. For them propaganda machine is something else. So, anytime they want to get with a leader, you hear them start to spread whole heap of things. Whole heap of things. And most of the time when them start to when they want to get out a leader, usually the leader was always an ally with them until the leader decides they're going to do something else. As we mentioned last week and week before, most of the man them where he rise up against America was one time partners with America. And most of the people them were, if you notice, even in a day we are going this or no, you know, like all Egypt, you know, Egypt is a strange place because Egypt, the people them in Egypt is now demonstrating against Israel. No, you know, America don't want that. So Obama is calling on the government that has been set up to quickly get rid of that protest. No protest against Israel is recommended there at this moment, because Israel is America's biggest ally. No, we are hear so much things about Gaddafi, but we want to mention some of the things them where about Gaddafi, really. I mean, really. As we are say, if you show me a leader where not have a serious problem with them people, them, well, because even in Jamaica right now, most Jamaican, as far as I see, have a problem with them prime minister and them government. Yes. Now, me could talk about some things in a Libya. Because I will mention Libya, Gaddafi has been giving aid to a lot of African countries, and he was the one who called for the breakdown of the barriers that divide the different states in Africa. According to Gaddafi, it was placed there by white people, and it's time we tear down those barriers, those illusion. Gaddafi said, "Me could tear it down. It's one Africa, that people can move freely through Africa." So that was really one of the big things them about Gaddafi's pronouncements about Africa. And Gaddafi also made a apology for Arab slavery, Africans who was enslaved by Arabs. Gaddafi make an apology. But inside a Gaddafi country, when Gaddafi was the leader, according to it go now, he is no longer the leader now, and NATO bomb it. But the story we're going to give now is the next story, because we don't even want to touch, we want to touch upon how them a kill off all of the black African them in Libya. I don't know how much you hear that news, but the Africans, especially those from Niger and Nigeria, is meeting hell. As a matter of fact, them going to a city yesterday. The population of 10,000 Traoré people from Niger. And Niger is the place where anytime you see them man, they put them camel and them face well wrap up from the sun. And them go in at the city, and there was no party in the city. And this was a city occupied by pure black Africans. How can a city with 10,000 inhabitants disappear like that? The people them just disappear. So the newsman went down there, and them here say them. Some of them say them people them run gone back to Niger, but 10,000 people. And we remember the killings in the hospital. It's pure black people. Yes, it dead in the hospital. Pure black people. I'm talk about black African. I'm talk about south of the Sahara. Black till them blue. So there is a serious killing that is taking place by these so-called rebel people. And the killing is addressed at and to all Africans who black. And when we say black now, we are talking about like me and you who are listening, most of you who are listening. We don't hear NATO who is still bombing the place. We don't hear them coming out and talking about this serious problem. What is this massacre of black people that is taking place in Libya by these rebels, these so-called rebels, who is claiming that a lot of these black people is militias that was employed by pro-Gaddafi followers. When we hear them attack, we hear Nigerians, I give them testimony. I said them live there for years and I work in Libya. Them don't know nothing about recruiting for go into no army for fight against rebel them. Yet still, women are being raped. Black women we are talking about now, and black man is being killed. I mean, if you see the hospital, man, where the reporter them going, man, the man them go in at the hospital where the most black African them there and wipe out the whole of the African them. Why? Anyway, we don't know how them are going to deal with this now. We don't know how them are going to deal with this now, because we know say America France, and England is the main instigators of this cruel act against the Libyan people. There is no electricity bill in Libya. Electricity is free for all of its citizens. That is the report that we get here, that in Libya, people don't pay electricity bill. There is no interest on loans. Banks in Libya are state-owned and loans given to all its citizens at 0% interest by law. Now we know one of Islamic tendencies is when them lend you money, them don't take interest. So I guess as a Muslim head of state, Muslim government, them follow suit and don't take interest. Can you imagine you live in a state where when you go to the bank and borrow money, them not charge no interest? Well, that was what was happening in Libya. There is no interest on loans in the banks in Libya. Home, which is owning a home in Libya, is considered a human right in Libya. All newlyweds in Libya receive $50,000 by the government to buy their first apartment, so to help start up the family. We are talking about Libya under Gaddafi now. Libya under Gaddafi. A newlywed in Libya received $50,000 by the government to buy them first house to start up their family. This is what we are called about. No, this is what we are talking about dictatorship and all these things, you know. I mean, this is some serious things there. Education and medical treatments are free in Libya. Before Gaddafi, 25% of Libyans were illiterate. Before Gaddafi, which is like 40 years ago. Before Gaddafi, 25% of Libyans were literate. Were literate. Today, the figure is 83% literate. So I'm reverse it. So really and truly 17% of the population is illiterate. Before Gaddafi, 25% of the population was literate. So in farming, we are reading this thing here. In farming, if you want to become a farmer, if you use farming as your career, you are given farming land, a farming house, equipment, seeds and livestock to kickstart your farm, all for free. If you decide you want to start a farm, you are given seeds, equipment, farming house, farming land, all for free. If Libyans cannot find the education or medical facilities they need in Libya, the government fund them to go abroad for it, not only free, but they get $2,300 per month accommodation and car allowance. This is if you want to further your education. In Libyan, if a Libyan buys a car, the government subsidizes 50% of the price. And listen to this one, you know. Listen to this one, you know. The price of petrol, I'm talking about the US dollar though. The price of petrol in Libya is 14 cents per liter. Boy, multiply 14 by 84 in that Jamaica, you know. That's a serious thing. 14 cents by 84. This is US. The price of petrol in Libya is 14 cents per liter. Libya has no external debt. meaning say the Libyan government, the country of Libya no owe nobody no money. And its reserves amount to $150 billion, which is now frozen globally. Libya has no external debt. We're talking about a government under Gaddafi. It has no external debt, and its reserve amount to $150 billion. Now frozen. No, this is a big one, you know. We want to read this one. This is a big one because this is a man who's supposed to be a terrible tyrant, a terrible this, a terrible that. And as we are saying, we know we can name out enough Gaddafi contemporary who in a power right now where nobody now invade them country, nobody now bomb them, and them are create havoc upon the lives of people. If a Libyan is unable to get employment after graduation, the state would pay the average salary of the profession as if he or she is employed until employment is found. A portion of Libyan oil sale is credited directly to the bank account of all Libyan citizens. A mother who gave birth to a child receives $5,000. 40 loaves of bread in Libya cost 15 cents. 40 loaves of bread in Libya cost 15 cents. 25% of Libyans have a university degree. 25% of Libyans have a university degree. Gaddafi carried out the world's largest irrigation project, known as the Great Man-Made River Project, to make water readily available throughout the desert country. I want the people them hear them statistics there. This is a man who we are supposed to know deemed wicked, murderous, need to go try in Hague. And we can tell you of a lot of leaders who was never carried to Hague, who have destroyed the way of life of people. 40 loaves of bread in Libya cost 15 cents. 25% of Libyans have a university degree. 25% of the population have a university degree. But we are now supposed to follow the media when a man who was killing Americans in Afghanistan went back to Libya and now is running what we call a semi-government that was overthrown by NATO forces, including America, England, France, to name some of them. What are we to think if we trace the history of these people, these politicians? How come we not hear no big alabaloo now against the so-called rebel forces who is torturing, raping, and murdering black Africans? How is it that a whole city of Africans disappear just like that? How is that possible? We're going to read this because it caught me. It caught me, man. It caught me because me listen to news all the while, all in Jamaica. It's like we are hearing news about a shooting we're going in a studio, must last night or night before last, and we hear the report in the paper one way, but the next day, like today, we are read the next report, and it not got nowhere like how it did report first originally. It not got nowhere like that. So we don't know, no, because the media, anybody control the media. The media is the most powerful entity in the society. And when certain people, you hear about Rupert Murdoch decide if you go to war or if you don't go to war, what you eat, what you wear, because he's the most powerful media man on earth. It's a serious, serious thing. So we're going to read this. The article says, disappeared. Thousands of Libyan blacks turn up missing in rebel offensive. I don't know how much of you hear this news here. But we want to read it. Thousands of Libyan blacks turn up missing in rebel offensive. Entire city depopulated, declared closed military area. You hear them designate that area now? Closed military area. September 13, 2011. Before the Libyan civil war, Tawaga was an agricultural city of some 10,000, mostly black people, with an economy centering around palm trees and date production. Today, it is entirely empty and declared a quote-unquote closed military area by the rebels. But where did the Tawargans go? That's not such an easy question to answer. This is a real thing going on in the movie, you know. The rebels rounded them all up and herded them into a refugee camp in Tripoli. But reporters that went to Tripoli found the camps empty as well, with the only person there, someone looting scrap metal out of one camp, declaring that they had gone to Niger. You know, that is across the border where them claims say Gaddafi good run go. No, Tripoli residents near the camp, however, report that the Tawargans had indeed been in the area, in the camp at one point, but that the camp itself was attacked by forces from Misrata. They beat the men, rounded up the women and children, and took them away in trucks. They believed the troops were taking them to another camp in another part of Tripoli. That camp, too, was empty. Black people have been disappearing all across Libya, with rebels arresting people simply on the basis of skin color. But how does a whole city go missing? It may be quite some time before we learn exactly what happened. But we have hints in media reports dating back to June, when Misrata rebels began openly talking about cleansing the region of blacks. To read that again, you know. This is where we are talking about, you know, who can we trust? Who can the people trust? These things is happening. The big news CNN and all these people not going to talk about it until an American bust it out in America. And they hear one big alabaloo. Misrata rebels began openly attacking about cleansing the region of blacks, and were saying that black Libyans might as well pack up because Tawaga no longer exists, only Misrata. Fast forward nearly 3 months from this proclamation, and we have an empty city where Tawaga once stood. The only sign saying Tawaga has been covered up with a new sign saying New Misrata. So, one whole city of black people missing. One whole city of black people missing. And no one know where these people are. And this is not a movie where some spaceship take out the people them and gone in some planet. This is real thing a go on in the 21st century. In Libya, black people are killed because they are black. In Africa. And that's the irony of that, no. And this is the irony there, you know. And this is the irony there. The irony is that black people is being killed in Africa because them black. In a one country where America and England decide, say, Gaddafi can't stay there. So they have to get rid of him. And now them side with some people who used to kill them. Islamic people. All of these uprising get out what you call a man who might be not so religious, yes, in place of a Islamic mindset. And we know say there's a war going on against Islam, even though them claim say not a war against Islam, but it's a war against Islam. Christianity versus Islam. Bush set that pace in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So we are say, which part them African they there? These black Africans, are they back in Niger? Or were they buried in the sands, in the Libyan desert? We see on our television and in our newspaper where black Africans were slaughtered in the hospital. As a matter of fact, we have watched some serious clips of Africans being killed by NATO forces, beheaded. Who believe that these civilized people from NATO forces is made up of all the whitest superpowers we can find on earth. Who would believe that they would go into a country and behead people? That is going on in Libya today. Today, that is going on in Libya. This is no joke business. This is a country that don't owe nobody no money. That 25% of them population have a degree. That you don't have to pay for light. Can you imagine we there so? And have a dictator. And we now, even though he's a dictator, according to how dictator go. Look on all country them where them demonize. Look on all Cuba. Look how America demonized Cuba for 40 years. Them a try kill Castro. And we grew up going here say Castro one devil. Communist devil. We grew up come hear that. And look on Cuba. We now get no money from Russia. Now get no money from nowhere. Self-reliant. Embargoed against Cuba for 40 years now or more. And them still survive. Them have the best doctors in the Caribbean, maybe not in the, maybe in the world. The best doctors medical service, health service, and education is free from that dictator. No. Look at this dictator, Gaddafi. Medical service, light bill, free. Them help you with farming tools and things to start up your farm. 25% of the population, 25% of the population have a university degree. That one they hold me, that one they hold me more than anyone. So what are we to believe now? What are we to believe when these people tell you things? When you hear all these things happening in the world, what are we to believe? Or is it that these people can sell us these things in our consciousness and we just gulp it down just like that? Just like that. Believe in it to the T, to the core. We believe them. All the while, we believe them. Yes, Cotton Edge.
MUTA.
Yes, sir.
Oh, blessed. You know, oh, may I listen to you talk to Gaddafi and when I hear you mention one important aspect where I'm doing in my life, you know, and that he write a book. You know,
What the book name?
It named The Green Book.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Yeah, we never mentioned that, that's true.
Yeah, well, you know, it just shows that the man have another side to him when enough leaders not really have.
Yeah.
You know, man, say, a real artistic and intellectual side for can compose them thing there.
Yeah, man.
You know, man, say.
You know, anytime him talk, them always report on the Gleaner, him not the Gleaner, on the news, CNN say, him is a madman. The way him talk, like when him did say, you know, American have something to do with the 9/11 situation there.
Yeah,
when him talk about the flu, the swine flu, when they come up with it, it's like them I say, wait, this man is a madman. And what I say? And then when him say Al Qaeda involved in the rebel uprising against him, CNN come out and say this man is a madman. Yet still know them come realize say the man who lead the thing used to kill Americans in Afghanistan. You know, so.
But even when in 2009, I think when him there give a speech at the UN, when them have them annual leaders thing where everybody go speak for them little time, you know, and him tear up the UN charter. You know, may I say, and the critics after that say him is a bad man. You know,
yeah, man. And him go live in a tent when him go to America. Him never go to a hotel. Him have him one tent and a pure woman and bodyguard.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know say that to show another side of the man and the mind, because you know Islamists or Muslim people not really have women in that regard to make them bodyguard. You know what I say? The man
really,
a
pure woman. Him did have a bodyguard. Him in I think a New Jersey. Him set up a tent, you know.
Yeah, free.
Yeah, man. I mean, we not gonna listen to what them I say, you know. Trust me, we not gonna listen to what them I say. A pure propaganda them I spread, man.
Yeah, man. So where you think him there? Where you think him?
When me think him there?
Yeah.
Negril.
You don't know. Give thanks to him.
Yeah, I blessed man.
All right,
yes, cool. Cut to the edge. I FM, we're there with you.